in the quiet village of Saint. Hilda's corner, secrets lie buried beneath the earth, secrets that were never meant to be found, but someone has already begun to uncover them, and now the past is waking up. And it will stop at nothing to reclaim what was lost. Chapter 1. The Quiet Village. The small, picturesque village of Saint. Hilda's corner sat nestled between rolling green hills, its cobblestone streets winding through rows of quaint, ivy-clad cottages. The village was one of those places that time seemed to have forgotten, or perhaps more accurately, a place where time moved with a much slower pace, like the old grandfather clock in the corner of Lady Fairfax's bookshop, ticking quietly, never in a hurry. It was late autumn when the story began, the air crisp with a coolness that hinted at the coming winter. The leaves had turned golden and russet, scattering themselves in wind-swept piles around the village green, and the scent of wood smoke curled from chimneys, filling the air with a comforting familiarity. The days were shorter now, and by the time the sun dipped behind the hills, the village was bathed in a soft amber glow, as though it were a place out of time, caught between the present and the past. At the heart of the village was Lady Fairfax's enchanted bookshop, a tiny tucked-away store that many people claimed had a life of its own. The bookshop was housed in an old stone building with narrow windows, the kind you'd expect to see in fairy tales. The shelves inside were crammed with books of all sorts, from the latest bestsellers to dusty leather-bound volumes that hadn't seen the light of day for decades. The shop's very air was thick with the scent of paper and ink, mingled with a faint trace of lavender and sandalwood, a fragrance Lady Fairfax, the shop's owner, loved to burn in the evenings. Lady Fairfax was a woman of indeterminate age, with soft, graying hair always tucked neatly under a bonnet, and a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles perched on the end of her nose. She had a quiet, unassuming demeanor, the kind that made her an excellent listener and an even better observer. There wasn't much she didn't notice about the people who wandered into her shop. She knew the locals by name, of course, but it was the strangers who came through the door, with their peculiar habits and hidden motives that often caught her attention. On this particular afternoon, as the golden light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the dusty floorboards, a new customer walked in. Emma Blackwood, a woman in her mid-30s, had arrived in St. Hilda's corner only a few weeks earlier. She was slender with dark, sleek hair and an air of someone who didn't quite belong. She had been quiet, keeping to herself mostly, but she had quickly become a familiar figure in Lady Fairfax's shop. Emma was drawn to old detective novels, often spending hours lost in their pages, her brow furrowed, as if the characters were speaking directly to her. Today, Emma seemed a little different. Her eyes were distant, and she appeared restless as she walked through the aisles of books, her fingers brushing the spines with a kind of urgency that Lady Fairfax had not seen before. She lingered near the back of the shop, just a few paces from Lady Fairfax's desk, where the elderly woman was dusting off an old leather-bound collection of Agatha Christie's works. "Can I help you, Miss Blackwood?" Lady Fairfax's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. Emma turned to her, offering a tight smile. "I'm just looking for something new to read," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "Something different." Lady Fairfax nodded, her gaze briefly flicking to the small stack of books in Emma's hands. They were all detective stories, as usual, but the titles were unfamiliar to her, obscure novels, some of which hadn't been printed in decades. "Looking for a bit of mystery today?" Lady Fairfax asked with a knowing smile. Emma chuckled faintly, though there was a shadow in her eyes. "You could say that," she replied, her voice a little strained. "I think there's something more to the stories than just fiction." Lady Fairfax raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "More than fiction?" she repeated, her interest piqued. But before she could press further, Emma quickly turned her attention back to the bookshelves, her fingers now trembling slightly as they traced the edges of a particular old, leather-bound book. The book was dusty, its spine creased from years of neglect. "Do you have anything more ancient?" Emma asked, her eyes glinting with a strange intensity. Lady Fairfax's curiosity deepened, but she didn't show it. She simply nodded and stepped around the counter, walking toward a row of older, more obscure volumes near the back of the shop. As she did, she couldn't help but notice how Emma's eyes followed her every move, her gaze lingering with an intensity that felt almost predatory. "I have a collection of early 20th century detective fiction," Lady Fairfax said, pulling a book from the shelf. "Would this suit your taste?" Emma's face lit up at the sight of the book, but she didn't take it immediately. Instead, she stood there for a long moment, as though pondering something, before her gaze shifted once more to the corner of the room. There, near a dusty window, was an old antique map of St. Hilda's Corner, a relic from the town's founding. Emma's eyes locked on the map for a split second, and then she turned back to Lady Fairfax with a sudden smile. "Yes, I'll take this one," she said, her voice almost too eager. Lady Fairfax handed the book to her, watching as Emma left the shop with a sense of purpose in her step. It was then that Lady Fairfax noticed something strange. Emma had left without paying. A chill passed through the air, though the warmth of the shop had not changed. Lady Fairfax stood still, staring at the door for a long time, her mind racing. She had seen many things in her time, but there was something unsettling about Emma Blackwood, something off. The following morning, Emma's disappearance would shake the quiet town of St. Hilda's Corner to its core, and the only clue left behind would be the ancient book, its pages dog-eared and stained with something far more mysterious than mere ink. Chapter 2. A Missing Customer. The morning after Emma Blackwood's strange visit, the village of St. Hilda's Corner seemed unusually still. The air, which had been crisp and full of life the day before, now hung heavy, almost as if it too was holding its breath. The only sound that could be heard was the soft rustling of leaves blowing across the cobbled streets and the distant clink of the blacksmith's hammer against an anvil. Lady Fairfax opened the door to her bookshop at precisely 9 a.m., just as she did every morning. The bell above the door tinkled, announcing her arrival to the quiet room. The smell of old books and lavender still lingered in the air, and the sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long, slanted shadows across the worn wooden floors. Everything seemed in its place, except for the empty feeling in the pit of Lady Fairfax's stomach. She had not seen Emma since yesterday afternoon, while this wasn't necessarily unusual. Something about Emma's demeanor had unsettled her. There had been an intensity in the young woman's eyes that Lady Fairfax couldn't quite shake, as if Emma was searching for something more than just a good story. As Lady Fairfax tidied up a stack of books by the counter, she noticed a piece of folded paper tucked beneath the cash register. It was simple, white, creased, and folded neatly. She hesitated for a moment, then picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting inside was unmistakably Emma's, though the words didn't make sense. "I've found what I'm looking for. But it's dangerous. You mustn't follow me. I can't explain more right now. But when the time comes, you'll understand." Lady Fairfax stood frozen, holding the letter in her hands, feeling the weight of it settle into her chest. Her mind raced. What had Emma found? And why had she felt the need to leave a message that seemed so cryptic? Her first instinct was to dismiss it as a passing whim, a misunderstanding perhaps. But Lady Fairfax had learned long ago not to ignore her instincts, and something told her that this was far more than an idle note. She placed the letter on the counter and walked to the window, staring out at the village. The streets were mostly empty this early in the morning, the only movement coming from a few scattered villagers making their way to the market square. Lady Fairfax's eyes narrowed as she scanned the scene. There was something off about the calm, something that didn't sit right. Without giving herself time to overthink, she decided to pay a visit to Emma's cottage on the outskirts of the village. If Emma wasn't at the bookshop, surely she would be at home. Emma's cottage was a charming little stone house tucked away behind a wild hedge of roses. The cottage's exterior was pristine, with window boxes brimming with bright red geraniums. It seemed like the very picture of peaceful rural life. But as Lady Fairfax walked up the narrow path leading to the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The door was ajar, slightly swinging in the breeze. "Miss Blackwood," Lady Fairfax called out softly, stepping inside. The hallway was quiet and the air smelled faintly of the same lavender scent that clung to the bookshop. The space was tidy but a little cold, as if someone had just left in a hurry. Lady Fairfax took a cautious step forward, her soft shoes making no sound on the wooden floor. She peered into the living room, then the kitchen, finding only traces of Emma's presence. A cup of tea half drunk, a book open on the armchair. But there was no sign of the woman herself. Her eyes then fell on the fireplace, where a small, faintly glowing object caught the sunlight. It was a pendant, a delicate silver chain with a small, ornate charm shaped like a key. The pendant seemed to shimmer as if it were waiting to be noticed. Lady Fairfax reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing the cool metal. As she held the pendant in her hand, she felt an odd sense of familiarity, though she couldn't place why. It was then that she noticed something even more peculiar. There were faint traces of dust also around the pendant, as if it had only just been moved. Something about this pendant unsettled her, but before she could examine it further, she heard a faint sound, a soft rustling, followed by a low, muffled thud. Her heart raced as she turned toward the sound, her gaze scanning the darkened hallway. The noise had come from upstairs. Without thinking twice, Lady Fairfax ascended the creaky staircase, each step reverberating softly in the quiet house. As she reached the top, she paused, listening intently. The house was still. The door to Emma's bedroom stood slightly ajar. The room was in disarray. The bed was unmade, clothes scattered across the floor, and the drawers had been pulled open, their contents spilling out onto the floor in a chaotic heap. But it wasn't the mess that struck Lady Fairfax. It was the absence of Emma. The room had an eerie feeling, as though someone had been here recently but had left in a rush. Lady Fairfax noticed a scrap of paper lying on the floor near the bedside table. She bent down to pick it up, and her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. It was a torn page from a book, one that Lady Fairfax recognized all too well. An old, rare edition of a mystery novel. The page was covered in strange symbols, as though someone had been scribbling something in a hurry. At the bottom of the page were more words in Emma's handwriting. "It's too late now. I'm in too deep. Please do not try to find me." Lady Fairfax's mind raced as she stood there, the weight of the note heavy in her hands. Emma had gone, but she hadn't left voluntarily. Something had happened to her, something that involved the strange symbols and the cryptic messages she had left behind. A cold shiver ran down Lady Fairfax's spine as she pieced everything together. Emma had known something, and now she was gone. But why had she left so suddenly? And who was behind this cryptic mystery? Lady Fairfax turned back toward the stairs, determination settling in her chest. She wasn't going to let this mystery go unsolved. She had to follow the clues, no matter how tangled they became. The first thread had been pulled, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 3. Enter Miss Fairfax. The afternoon sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Lady Fairfax returned to her bookshop, the weight of Emma's disappearance settling more heavily with each passing hour. The quaint village of St. Hilda's Corner seemed to have darkened along with the sky. The streets, once bright and lively, were now quiet, and the familiar sounds of village life, children laughing, the blacksmith's hammer ringing, had faded into an unsettling silence. Inside her bookshop, Lady Fairfax felt the familiar embrace of order and comfort that the dusty pages of books provided. But today the shop felt emptier, more foreign. She locked the door behind her and moved slowly to her desk, setting down the torn page she had found in Emma's room. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it again, running her eyes over the strange symbols and fragmented sentences. Something wasn't right. Emma's handwriting was hurried, and the pages had been ripped out of the book with no care for preservation. The book itself, The Secrets of the Village, was missing. It had been a rare piece, one of a kind, a deep dive into the town's secretive past. It didn't seem like the kind of book Emma would typically read, which made Lady Fairfax wonder if perhaps the young woman had been looking for something more than a mere story. Lady Fairfax reached for a notebook kept behind the counter and began scribbling notes. The book's history, Emma's behavior, the strange symbols, the note that had been left for her. As she worked, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something important had been overlooked, something that was just out of reach. The shop's bell chimed, signaling the entrance of a customer. Lady Fairfax glanced up, expecting a familiar face, but instead she saw a man standing by the door, tall with dark, disheveled hair and an expression that spoke of exhaustion. His sharp eyes scanned the room, and though he looked somewhat out of place in the cozy, quaint atmosphere, his presence seemed oddly fitting for the mystery now taking shape around her. "Good evening," Lady Fairfax said, offering a polite smile. "May I help you?" The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'm looking for a book," he said, his voice low but steady. "A very specific book." Lady Fairfax didn't recognize him, but that wasn't unusual. The shop had seen more than its fair share of visitors over the years, most of whom came for obscure texts and arcane knowledge. Still, something about this man felt different. His aura was one of quiet urgency, as if he were on the edge of something important or dangerous. "A specific book?" Lady Fairfax echoed, raising an eyebrow. "What might it be?" He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving her face. "I've been told that this bookshop is the place to find things others might not want found." Her curiosity piqued. Lady Fairfax raised an eyebrow. "We do have many rare books, yes, but I'm afraid I'm not sure which one you mean." He met her eyes, his gaze sharp, as though he was sizing her up. "It's called The Secrets of the Village," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. "I understand you may have a copy." Lady Fairfax's heart skipped a beat. The Secrets of the Village. The very same book Emma had been searching for. She kept her expression neutral, but the hairs in the back of her neck stood up. "I may have a copy, yes." Lady Fairfax replied, trying to keep her tone even. "But I'm afraid that particular book is not for sale. It's rather rare and it holds a certain historical significance to the village." The man's eyes flashed at something. Frustration, perhaps. "You don't understand," he said, his tone growing sharper. "It's not a matter of purchase. I need it, and I need it now." Lady Fairfax felt a surge of tension in the air. She had dealt with her fair share of odd customers, but there was something in the man's voice that made her wary. She stood a little straighter, instinctively guarding the secret of the bookshop. "Perhaps you should clarify exactly what you're after," she said, her voice calm, but with an underlying edge. "If you're looking for the secrets of the village, I can tell you where it may be found, but it's not a book that can simply be handed over to anyone." The man took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. He seemed to relax, but there was still a hard edge to his demeanor. "I'm not here to argue," he said quietly. "I'm here because Emma Blackwood came to you last night. She left with something that could cause a great deal of trouble for many people. I'm the one who's supposed to stop it." Lady Fairfax's mind raced. Emma had indeed left the shop the previous day, but had she taken the secrets of the village? And why would this stranger know about it? "Who are you?" Lady Fairfax asked, her voice steady but firm. "And what exactly do you know about Emma?" The man hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the door as if weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. "My name is Dr. Richard Branson," he said. "I'm a historian, but I've also spent many years investigating strange occurrences. Things that most people wouldn't believe. Emma Blackwood got in over her head. She found something in that book that she shouldn't have, and now she's in danger." He paused, his gaze shifting to the counter where Lady Fairfax had placed the letter and the torn page. "I need your help to find her before it's too late." Lady Fairfax stood motionless, her thoughts swirling like leaves in the wind. Everything was happening too quickly. A historian? An investigator of strange occurrences? She had no reason to trust this man, but something in his eyes told her that his concerns were not entirely unfounded. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But I'll help you if it means finding Emma and making sure no one else is harmed." Dr. Branson nodded, a faint trace of relief crossing his features. "You'll have to trust me," he said. "The book, the pendant, the symbols, it's all connected. And now, so are we. We're the only ones who can uncover what Emma has uncovered." With that, he turned toward the door, giving Lady Fairfax one last look before stepping out into the cool evening air. As the door swung shut behind him, Lady Fairfax felt a strange weight settle over her. She was no longer just a quiet bookshop owner. She was now part of something far larger, something darker. She turned back to the counter, picking up the torn page, the pendant and the letter, her mind buzzing with questions. What had Emma found? And how far would Lady Fairfax go to uncover the truth? Chapter 4. The Letter's Clue. Lady Fairfax sat in her quiet bookshop, the dimming light casting long shadows across the walls. The shop was quiet save for the soft rustling of paper as she pored over the scraps left behind by Emma Blackwood. The torn page, the pendant, the letter. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form an uncomfortable picture in her mind, but something still didn't fit. She had spent the last few hours trying to make sense of the symbols on the page, tracing them with her finger as though the movement might unlock their meaning. There was something ancient about them, something that hinted at a long-forgotten part of the village's history. But the more she looked, the more questions arose. Emma's letter still weighed heavily on her heart. "I've found what I'm looking for, but it's dangerous. You mustn't follow me. I can't explain more right now, but when the time comes, you'll understand." The words rang in Lady Fairfax's mind like a distant echo, growing fainter with each passing moment. What had Emma meant by dangerous? And what exactly had she found? But there was one thing that stuck out: the map. Lady Fairfax had overlooked it earlier, too distracted by Emma's sudden disappearance. It wasn't just any map. It was an old map of St. Hilda's Corner, one that Lady Fairfax had never seen before. Its edges were frayed, its surface stained by time. There were markings all over the map, most of which were faint and difficult to decipher. But one thing was clear: the map pointed to a specific spot near the village green, right at the heart of the town. Curiosity gnawed at Lady Fairfax as she laid the map flat on the counter. She studied the markings carefully. One symbol was repeated several times near the village green, an old, mysterious symbol that looked strangely familiar. It resembled the shape of the pendant that Emma had left behind, the one she had found earlier in Emma's cottage. The resemblance was undeniable. Her hand hovered over the map as she tried to place the symbol, her mind racing. The pendant, the symbols on the page, the map, they were all connected. And if she was going to find Emma, she needed to follow these clues, no matter where they led. Lady Fairfax folded the map and tucked it into her coat pocket. It was time to take action. The walk to the village green was short, but it gave Lady Fairfax ample time to reflect on everything that had happened so far. The village green itself was a peaceful place, surrounded by old oak trees and benches where villagers often gathered for quiet conversations. But today there was no one in sight. It was eerily empty, the kind of stillness that made the air feel thick with secrets. Lady Fairfax stood at the edge of the green, looking around for any sign of the markings from the map. The ground seemed ordinary enough, covered with a blanket of fallen leaves and wildflowers. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. She began to walk slowly, eyes scanning the ground, her mind piecing together the fragments of information she had. The symbol on the map had been placed near a large, twisted oak tree on the far side of the green. Could this be it? As she neared the tree, she felt a sense of unease settle over her. The oak was old, its gnarled branches stretching out like fingers toward the sky. The ground around it was soft and damp, as if the tree had a long history of absorbing secrets. Lady Fairfax knelt down, her fingers brushing the earth. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she knew she had to start somewhere. A soft rustling noise caught her attention, and she froze. For a brief moment, she thought she had heard footsteps approaching. But when she looked around, the green remained as quiet and empty as before. Shaking off the chill that had crept up her spine, she dug her hands into the soil beneath the tree. The ground was soft, and her fingers easily parted the earth, revealing something solid beneath. It was a small weathered chest, wooden, bound in iron, and covered in moss. The sight of it caused her heart to race. Had Emma hidden it here, or had someone else left it behind? Lady Fairfax hesitated for a moment, then gently pried open the chest. Inside she found a collection of strange objects. A few old yellowed letters, a few small trinkets, and something that caught her eye, a tattered book bound in leather. The cover was unmarked, and the edges were worn with age. But when Lady Fairfax opened it, she instantly recognized the pages inside. It was the secrets of the village, the very book Emma had been searching for. Lady Fairfax's breath caught in her throat as she flipped through the pages. The symbols on the map, the ones Emma had written about, were all contained within these pages. But there was something else, a list of names. Each name was followed by a brief description, and as Lady Fairfax scanned them, a cold shiver ran down her spine. These were the names of people from the village's past, many of whom had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. But one name stood out to her more than the rest. Emma Blackwood. Lady Fairfax's eyes widened. The book was not just a record of history, it was a guide to something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. As Lady Fairfax closed the book, her mind raced with possibilities. Emma had been searching for something that had drawn her into a web of mystery and danger. And now, the answers were within her grasp, but they came at a cost. The book, the chest, the symbols, all of it was part of something larger, something that reached back through the centuries. Lady Fairfax stood up, her mind spinning. She had found the book, but now she had to figure out what it all meant and who was behind it all. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The walk back to the bookshop was quieter than ever. As Lady Fairfax approached the familiar door, she realized that the search for Emma had just begun. And what lay ahead was far darker than she had anticipated. Chapter 5. Unlikely Confessions. The next morning, Lady Fairfax awoke with a sense of urgency that had settled into her bones like a quiet storm. She had spent the night turning over the clues in her mind. The secrets of the village, the hidden chest, the symbols, and most chilling of all, the fact that Emma Blackwood's name was written in that ancient book. Emma was no ordinary visitor to the bookshop. Lady Fairfax had begun to believe that she had uncovered something far bigger than just a missing person case. This was about the very heart of the village, and possibly something older and far more dangerous. She took a deep breath and made a decision. If she was to solve this mystery, she would need to speak to those who knew Emma best. After all, every story had a beginning, and Lady Fairfax was determined to uncover the truth. No more secrets, no more hiding. Her first stop was Miss Eliza Green, an elderly woman who had been Emma's neighbor ever since she'd moved to St. Hilda's Corner. Miss Green had always been kind enough to share bits of village gossip, and Lady Fairfax had always found her insightful, though sometimes a little too keen on seeing the darker side of things. Lady Fairfax knocked gently on the door of Miss Green's cottage, a small, ivy-covered house at the edge of the village. The sound of shuffling feet reached her ears before the door opened to reveal Miss Green, her frail figure hidden behind a thick pair of spectacles. "Lady Fairfax, what a surprise," Miss Green said, her voice sweet but lined with an unmistakable weariness. "What brings you here at this hour?" "I'm sorry to disturb you, Miss Green," Lady Fairfax began, offering a warm smile. "I'm looking for some information about Emma Blackwood. I know she lived next door to you for a time, and I was wondering if you might be able to share anything unusual about her or her behavior recently." Miss Green's eyebrows furrowed, and for a moment, her expression softened into one of contemplation. "Emma, dear. Well, she was a quiet one, always with her nose buried in a book much like you," she said, her voice betraying a trace of nostalgia. "But lately, I'd say she'd become, well, a bit agitated, a little distant. She spoke of strange dreams that made her believe she was being followed." "Followed?" Lady Fairfax asked, her voice sharp. Miss Green nodded, her wrinkled hands adjusting her spectacles. "Yes, she was convinced someone was watching her, though she could never say who." She came by not long ago, asking about some of the older stories of the village. Stories I thought were just forgotten myths. But she seemed to think they were more than just stories. Miss Green leaned in closer, as though sharing a secret. You know, there's talk in this village of things that happen when the moon is high. Old things, hidden things. Lady Fairfax's curiosity piqued. What things? What stories? Miss Green's eyes darted toward the window, as if checking to make sure they were alone. Oh dear, I shouldn't be saying too much. There are rumors of lost treasures, hidden beneath the village green, where the old oak tree stands. People say it's been there for centuries. Some believe the tree itself hides secrets, secrets that were never meant to be found. But Emma believed those stories. She seemed convinced that something was buried there, something important. Lady Fairfax's heart quickened as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. What else did she say, Miss Green? She said she had a feeling, a sense that the village was on the verge of something. But she never explained it fully, Miss Green continued, her voice growing softer. And then there was that book she asked about, The Secrets of the Village. She wanted to know everything about it. I told her it was a collection of old stories, nothing more. But she wouldn't be satisfied. She kept asking questions, too many questions, and now she's gone, vanished. It's all so odd, Lady Fairfax, I'm worried. Lady Fairfax nodded thoughtfully. Everything was connecting. The book, the symbols, the village green, and Emma's disappearance. But there was one thing she still didn't understand. Do you know where she went after she left here, Miss Green? Lady Fairfax asked, her voice quiet with urgency. Miss Green shook her head. No, dear. She never said a word. But I did hear something strange from a local boy, Samuel Drake. He's a bit of a troublemaker, but he swears he saw Emma talking to someone in the woods just before she disappeared. Someone tall, wearing a dark cloak. I don't know if I believe him, but it might be worth asking him. Lady Fairfax thanked Miss Green and quickly made her way toward the edge of the village, where Samuel Drake lived. The boy was known for his mischief, but he was also a sharp observer of things, and Lady Fairfax had a hunch that his information might be crucial. The path to Samuel's home was long, winding between trees and overgrown hedges. By the time Lady Fairfax reached the boy's cottage, the sky had grown dim with the approaching twilight. Samuel was outside, tossing a ball against the wall, his disheveled hair and torn trousers making him look more like a wild creature than a boy. Samuel, Lady Fairfax called, her voice firm. Samuel stopped, looking up with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. What's the old bookworm want? He muttered, his tone disrespectful, but not unkind. Did you see Emma Blackwood recently? Lady Fairfax asked. I heard you may have seen something that could help. Samuel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the ground. I don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, but Lady Fairfax could see the unease in his posture. Samuel, she said gently, if you know something, please tell me. Emma's gone missing, and I need to understand what happened. The boy hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a hushed tone, as if afraid someone might overhear. I saw her talking to someone by the woods near the old stone circle, he said. It was late at night. A tall man in a black cloak. She seemed scared, like she was trying to get away, but he kept talking to her. I don't know what they were saying, but she didn't look right. It's like she was in a trance or something. Lady Fairfax's heart sank. Did you recognize him? Did he say anything to you? No, ma'am. I didn't stay around to find out. Samuel replied quickly, his voice low. But there's something wrong about all this. People are talking, saying that something's been awakened, something that should have stayed buried. Lady Fairfax's thoughts raced. Everything was pointing to the same place. The village green, the tree, the buried secrets. But now there was more to the mystery. Someone had been manipulating Emma, someone with dark intentions. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "You've been very helpful." As Lady Fairfax walked back toward the center of the village, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was closing in on something dangerous. The clues were stacking up, and yet the danger only seemed to deepen. Emma Blackwood's disappearance wasn't just about a missing person anymore. It was about something much darker. And Lady Fairfax was no longer just a bystander in this mystery. She was in the thick of it. Chapter 6. The Book's Secret. The wind had picked up by the time Lady Fairfax returned to her bookshop, the darkening sky casting long shadows over the village, as though the day itself was reluctant to end. Her mind was heavy with everything she had learned. Samuel's account, Miss Green's ominous warnings, and the unsettling knowledge that Emma Blackwood had been talking to someone connected to the very heart of the village's secrets. Lady Fairfax locked the door behind her, the shop now closed for the day, but she knew her work was far from over. She had the book, the one Emma had been desperate to find, and it was in her hands now, its weight heavy with a history she had yet to fully understand. With careful fingers, Lady Fairfax opened The Secrets of the Village once more. The leather was cold to the touch, and the pages were yellowed with age. As she flipped through, the familiar symbols caught her eye again, repeating in various sections of the book, their meaning still unclear. But something had shifted since the last time she opened the book. The symbols seemed to be pointing her towards something specific, something hidden in plain sight. She traced the ink with her fingers, noting how some of the text was smudged, as though it had been touched frequently by eager hands. The book wasn't just a collection of old stories, it was a record, a ledger of sorts, detailing events and names that had long been buried by time. But it wasn't just history, it was a blueprint for the village's buried past. Lady Fairfax's breath caught as she turned to a page near the back, one that seemed less worn than the others. The page was filled with strange writing. This time, not in the form of the familiar symbols, but in dense, flowing text. It was written in a language she didn't recognize at first, but something about the style felt close, like a twisted version of the village's ancient dialect. She reached for her glasses, carefully scanning the lines. The words began to fall into place as the meaning grew clearer in her mind. It was a ritual. A description of a hidden ceremony that had taken place centuries ago, right here in St. Hilda's corner. A ceremony to protect something ancient, something powerful. The page described a hidden chamber beneath the village green, a secret that had been locked away by the founders of the village, kept hidden from the world to ensure the safety of their descendants. But it wasn't just a hiding place. It was a seal that bound something terrible, something dark, deep beneath the earth. Lady Fairfax's heart raced as she read further. The seal was meant to remain unbroken until someone like Emma came along, someone who sought answers and unwittingly triggered something that should never have been disturbed. A cold shiver ran through her as she closed the book with a snap, her fingers trembling slightly. The symbols, the map, the pendant, it was all connected. But what had Emma discovered that had made her leave in such a hurry? Why had she risked everything to uncover the truth? Lady Fairfax glanced toward the counter where the pendant still lay, its cold silver surface gleaming in the low light. It was the same symbol from the book, the same shape from the map. The pendant wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a key. A key to the seal that held whatever was buried beneath the village. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions. She had to get to the village green. She had to see the oak tree, the place where Emma had last been seen, and see if the book's description of the hidden chamber could be true. She grabbed her coat and made for the door, but just as she reached for the handle, a knock came at the window. Lady Fairfax froze, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the knock, gentle but insistent, sent a pang of unease through her. Peering through the window, she saw a figure standing in the fading light, a silhouette she recognized. Dr. Richard Branson. She let out a sigh of relief, but the moment was short-lived. What could he want now? Lady Fairfax opened the door slowly, her eyes narrowing as she saw the determined look on his face. "You're back," she said, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "Is something wrong?" Dr. Branson didn't answer immediately. He glanced around the bookshop, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made Lady Fairfax uneasy. He then stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I'm afraid we don't have much time," he said quietly. "You're right to have found the book. But there's something else you need to know." He paused, as though weighing his words carefully. "There's someone else involved in this. Someone who's been watching Emma Lady Fairfax's pulse quickened." "Who?" Branson's eyes flicked toward the book on the counter, then back to her. The village wasn't built on just history. It was built to hide something. Something that was meant to remain forgotten. He took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been tracking a group, an underground society that believes in the old ways, in the power that's buried beneath the village. They think the time has come to break the seal, to release whatever it is that was sealed away all those years ago. Emma found something she wasn't supposed to. And now she's disappeared because of it." Lady Fairfax's mind spun as the implications of his words began to sink in. "So you're telling me someone else is behind Emma's disappearance? Someone who wants to open the seal?" Branson nodded grimly. "Yes. And we need to stop them. We need to find Emma before they do. The book, the map, the pendant, it's all part of the same puzzle. The seal is weakening, and if we don't act soon, whatever is locked beneath this village will be free. And that will be the end of Saint, Hilda's Corner, and much, much more." Lady Fairfax swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The stakes were higher than she could have imagined. She wasn't just chasing a missing person anymore. She was chasing something far more dangerous. Something with the potential to destroy everything she held dear. "We need to go to the village green," Lady Fairfax said, her voice steady but determined. "There's no more time to waste." Branson didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." The two of them hurried toward the village green, their steps quickening as the shadows grew longer around them. The evening had fallen completely, and the moon was beginning to rise, casting a pale light across the ground. When they reached the oak tree, Lady Fairfax felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The tree seemed more imposing now, its twisted branches reaching out like arms, its roots deep within the earth. She could almost hear the faint echo of something stirring beneath the ground, as if it were waiting for them to come closer. And yet, something inside her told her that they weren't alone. Chapter 7. The Ties That Bind. The village green was eerily silent as Lady Fairfax and Dr. Branson stood before the ancient oak, The night air had turned colder, and the moonlight that bathed the village felt harsh and distant. It was as though the world itself had quieted, waiting for something, waiting for them. Lady Fairfax's gaze remained fixed on the gnarled tree, its twisted branches stretching up to the heavens like hands desperate for release. Her heart pounded in her chest as she felt a strange sense of dread settle into her bones. The tree had always been there, a part of the landscape that people admired from afar, but now it felt more like a sentinel, guarding something ancient and dangerous beneath its roots. Dr. Branson stood beside her, his face grim, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is it," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "The place where it all began." Lady Fairfax nodded, but said nothing. She could feel the weight of the book, the symbols, and the pendant in her mind, all converging on this very spot. This was where the past and present collided, where secrets buried for centuries were now being brought to light. But the question remained, what would they uncover here? "You're sure this is where Emma was last seen?" Lady Fairfax asked. Though she already knew the answer, she needed to hear it again to solidify the gravity of the situation in her mind. "Yes," Branson replied, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "This is the location the book pointed to, and I suspect Emma discovered something the others are desperate to keep hidden." Lady Fairfax turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Who are the others?" she asked, a thread of suspicion entering her voice. Dr. Branson had been helpful, yes, but there was still much she didn't know about him. "Who exactly are we up against?" Branson hesitated, then looked around once more, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a secret society in this village, one that traces its origins to the very founding of Saint. Hilda's Corner. They believe in the old ways, in the power that was sealed away beneath this village, and they believe it's time to release it." The air seemed to grow colder as Lady Fairfax processed his words. "And Emma, she found them. She found the book and she started asking too many questions. That's why they took her." Branson's eyes flicked toward the base of the oak tree. "I believe they've been watching her for some time, watching her every move. She was the key to unlocking the seal, and once they realized she was getting too close, they decided to act." Lady Fairfax's pulse quickened as the reality of the situation sank in. Emma hadn't just stumbled into danger. She had been targeted, but why? Why her? And how had Emma managed to uncover so much about the village's dark past? "I have to know," Lady Fairfax muttered, mostly to herself. "What's in the book? What's beneath the village?" Branson didn't answer right away, his gaze lingering on the oak tree. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully, as if considering how much to reveal. Finally he spoke, his voice low and strained. "The book is more than just a record of history. It's a guide, a ritual. The founders of this village were not just settlers. They were guardians, chosen to protect something that should never be released. Beneath this village lies an ancient power, one that has been kept sealed for centuries." Lady Fairfax felt a chill run down her spine. "An ancient power?" "Yes," Branson said, his eyes now locked onto hers. "The seal beneath the village green was put in place to keep something imprisoned. Something dangerous. If the seal breaks, it will release whatever is trapped inside. And no one knows what that will mean for this village or for the world beyond it." A long silence stretched between them. Lady Fairfax absorbed his words, trying to make sense of the pieces that were falling into place. The symbols, the book, Emma's disappearance, It was all connected to this power, to something that had been buried under the village for far too long. "What are we supposed to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stop them," Branson replied, his gaze sharp and determined. "We need to find Emma before they do. The seal is weakening, and the longer we wait, the more difficult it will be to keep it contained. If the society gets their hands on the key, the book, the pendant, they'll unlock the seal. We have to reach it first." Lady Fairfax nodded, her heart pounding. The stakes had never been higher. Emma, the book, the pendant. It was all leading them to this moment. But could they make it in time? Would they be able to stop the society from breaking the seal? The night seemed to close in around them, the shadows deepening, as Lady Fairfax's thoughts swirled with uncertainty. And then, a noise broke the silence, a soft creaking, followed by a faint scraping sound. Lady Fairfax's eyes snapped to the oak tree, her breath catching in her throat. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Branson's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "Stay back," he warned, his voice low. "Something's happening." The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, as though the earth itself were shifting. The air grew thick, as though a storm were gathering on the horizon. And then, from the base of the oak tree, a small section of the earth began to shift, slowly, steadily. The ground cracked, revealing a dark opening below. Lady Fairfax's heart raced as she stepped back, her mind reeling. The seal was weakening. They weren't the only ones looking for the power beneath the village. The society had already begun their ritual. "Get back to the bookshop," Branson said urgently, his eyes scanning the ground. "We have to stop them before it's too late." But it was too late. The earth groaned beneath them, and with a sudden violent shift, the ground around the oak tree collapsed, revealing a hidden stone staircase that led down into the darkness. Chapter 8. Deeper Investigation. The stone staircase descended into the bowels of the earth, its edges jagged and worn by time, like the very foundation of the village had been carved from a forgotten age. Lady Fairfax's heart thudded in her chest as she and Dr. Branson stepped cautiously down the narrow steps, the air growing cooler with each descending footfall. The faint hum of energy, a strange, almost magnetic sensation, was in the air, vibrating through the walls and floor like a pulse. With every step, the world above seemed to fade further away, replaced by the thick silence of what lay beneath. The walls of the stone staircase were covered in ancient faded carvings, symbols Lady Fairfax recognized as the same ones she had seen in the book, etched deep into the pages and the pendant she had found. The seal, the key to everything. It was here. They reached the bottom of the staircase, and Lady Fairfax's breath caught. Before them stood a massive stone door, intricately carved with the same symbols from the book, and at its center, a large circular indentation. This was the entrance to the sealed chamber, the place where the ancient power had been locked away. The door loomed, silent and foreboding, as if it had been waiting for them all this time. It was hard to tell how old it was, but the presence of the symbols, both familiar and foreign, suggested it had been here far longer than the town itself. Dr. Branson approached the door slowly, his eyes scanning the surface. He seemed oddly calm, as though he had been here before, though he hadn't mentioned any prior knowledge of the place. His fingers brushed over the symbols, tracing their contours, before he turned to Lady Fairfax with a grave expression. "This is it," he said softly. "We're standing at the edge of something far older than we imagined. This door, It's more than just a seal. It's a barrier. And only those with the key can unlock it. Lady Fairfax glanced at the indentation in the center of the door. The pendant, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a thunderclap. The pendant Emma had left behind, the one that matched the symbols in the book. It was the key. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pendant, the cool silver weight familiar in her palm. The symbol on it seemed to pulse in her hand as if it were alive, attuned to the very heartbeat of the door. Without a word, she stepped forward and placed the pendant into the circular indentation. For a long moment, nothing happened. Lady Fairfax held her breath and Dr. Branson's gaze never left the door. Then, slowly, a low rumbling sound filled the chamber. The stone door began to move, grinding against the earth with an ancient reluctant groan. Dust and fragments of rock fell from the ceiling as the door inched open, revealing a dark, vast space beyond. The air grew colder still, and the oppressive feeling of dread that had settled over Lady Fairfax intensified. She could feel it now, the presence, the power. It was waiting for them. As the door fully opened, a gust of stale air rushed past them, carrying the faintest scent of decay. The chamber beyond was vast, its high vaulted ceiling disappearing into the darkness above. Lady Fairfax could barely make out the faint outline of walls on either side. But what stood out in the center of the room was a large stone altar covered in symbols. Atop the altar lay something wrapped in old cloth, its shape indistinct. Dr. Branson stepped forward first, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "This is it," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "The chamber." The place where it all started. Lady Fairfax followed, her feet echoing on the cold stone floor. Her gaze swept over the altar, the symbols etched into the surface, the energy that seemed to pulse from every corner of the room. This was where the ancient power had been sealed away, and now it was closer than ever before. She stepped up to the altar and reached out, pulling away the cloth with trembling hands. Beneath it lay a stone tablet, worn and weathered by centuries of neglect. On the surface of the tablet was an inscription, faded but still readable. The symbols, once again, matched those in the book and the pendant, and at the center of the tablet was a large circular groove, shaped perfectly to fit the pendant. This was the key, Lady Fairfax said, her voice low and filled with awe. The pendant unlocks more than just the door. It's part of the ritual that seals or unleashes the power beneath the village. Branson stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the tablet. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "This tablet tells the final part of the story. It describes the ritual to either bind or release the force hidden below." "But there's more." Lady Fairfax turned toward him, her brow furrowing. "More? What do you mean?" "There's a warning," Branson said, his voice tight. "The seal is not just to keep something buried. It's to prevent the release of something that could consume everything. The founder, they believed the power beneath the village was too great, too dangerous for anyone to wield. That's why they created this ritual. They made sure that only those who understand the full story could release it. But the society, the ones Emma found, they don't understand what they're dealing with." Lady Fairfax's stomach clenched. "They think they're releasing a power, but they're only unleashing destruction." Branson nodded. "Exactly." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air between them. The room seemed to grow darker. the shadows stretching longer as if responding to the danger they were about to confront. They had come so far, and yet the most dangerous part was still ahead. Lady Fairfax glanced at the stone tablet again, her mind racing with the implications of what Branson had said. The society had been seeking the power beneath the village for years. They had been looking for the key, the book, the pendant, all the pieces of the puzzle. But now, with the seal weakened, it was only a matter of time before they found a way to release whatever was locked below. "We need to stop them," Lady Fairfax said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "Before it's too late." Branson met her gaze, his eyes dark and filled with an understanding of the gravity of their mission. "We will," he said, "but we need to act quickly. The ritual can't be completed unless they have all the pieces. The book, the pendant, and the final key." Lady Fairfax turned to him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What's the final key?" Branson stepped closer to the altar and gestured to the tablet. "The key is here," he said. "The pendant fits perfectly, but only if it's placed in the center of the ritual's completion. But it's not just about opening the seal, it's about sealing it again, for good." Lady Fairfax understood. The ritual wasn't just about unlocking the power, it was about making sure it stayed sealed, hidden away where it belonged. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. Chapter 9. Building Suspense. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and suddenly, Lady Fairfax's heart skipped a beat. She turned sharply, her eyes darting toward the entrance of the chamber. The soft echo of shoes scraping against the stone floor told her they weren't alone anymore. Someone was coming. Dr. Branson was already moving, his hand reaching toward his coat. But Lady Fairfax knew they didn't have much time. Whoever was approaching, they were too late to stop the ritual now. The door to the chamber had been opened, and the secrets buried beneath the village were already beginning to stir. Whatever had been sealed away for centuries was now in danger of being unleashed. "I knew you'd find it," came a voice from the shadows. Lady Fairfax froze, her pulse racing as the figure stepped forward into the dim light. A tall man, cloaked in dark robes, his face hidden beneath the hood. The voice was calm, almost serene, but there was an unmistakable malice in his tone. Lady Fairfax recognized him instantly. "Lucius Ward." Dr. Branson's voice was low, but filled with venom. "I should have known." Lucius smiled beneath his hood, his cold eyes gleaming in the low light. "Dr. Branson, always the skeptic," he said with a chuckle. "I told you, there are things far older than we can understand." And now it's time to open the seal. Time to release what's been locked away. Lady Fairfax felt the weight of his words sink in. Ward, he was one of the leaders of the society that had been trying to uncover the power beneath the village. The very same group that had been watching Emma pulling the strings from the shadows. But now it was clear that their patience had run out. They were here to finish what they had started. "What do you want with the seal, Ward?" Lady Fairfax demanded, her voice steady, despite the dread pooling in her stomach. Lucius took a step closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "You still don't understand, do you?" His voice was laced with an almost sadistic delight. "This power beneath your precious village, it's not just history. It's not just a secret. It's the key to everything." Lady Fairfax's mind raced. "The key to what?" she asked, her voice filled with suspicion. Lucius tilted his head, his expression darkening. "To power. True power. The kind that transcends time. The kind that can bend the very fabric of reality itself." He stepped closer still, his words becoming more urgent, more fevered. For centuries, this village has been built on the backs of the foolish, those who didn't understand, but now we do. And soon, this world will know what we've discovered. Dr. Branson's face was set in a tight grimace. You're playing with something you don't understand, Ward. You think you can control it? You think you can release this power and walk away with it? His voice dropped lower. You'll be consumed. All of you. Lucius smiled darkly. That's the price of knowledge, isn't it? The price of power. He stepped aside, revealing two more figures emerging from the shadows. A man and a woman, both dressed in the same dark robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. We've already paid that price, Doctor. Branson. And soon, you'll understand that it was worth it. Lady Fairfax's heart raced as she looked at the three members of the society, their cold, calculating eyes locked onto her. There was no turning back now. The ritual had already begun. They were here to finish what they had started. We won't let you, Lady Fairfax said firmly, her gaze narrowing as she reached into her coat pocket with the pendant. Lucius chuckled, shaking his head. You misunderstand, Lady Fairfax. This isn't about letting us or stopping us. It's about fate. And it's already been sealed. At that, the air in the chamber seemed to change, growing thicker, heavier, as though something deep within the earth had begun to stir. A low, almost imperceptible rumbling filled the room, vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. Lady Fairfax's eyes snapped to the stone altar, where the pendant was now resting. The grooves were pulsing with an unnatural light, the same eerie glow that had surrounded the symbols earlier. Something was happening. No, she whispered, her heart sinking. It's already too late. Branson's face was ashen, his hands clenched into fists. We have to stop them, he said, turning to Lady Fairfax, his eyes desperate. There's no time. Lady Fairfax nodded quickly, her mind whirling with one thought. Stop them, before it was too late. She lunged forward, reaching for the pendant, but Lucius was already too quick. He snapped his hand out, grabbing her wrist with a strength that seemed unnatural. It's too late, Lady Fairfax, he said, his voice cold. You should have stayed out of this. But Lady Fairfax didn't back down. With a surge of strength, she twisted out of his grip and slammed her elbow into his chest, knocking him back a few steps. The other two members of the society lunged at her, but she was ready, her mind sharp and focused. She wasn't going to let them finish the ritual. Not now. Not when they were so close to unlocking something that could destroy them all. Dr. Branson, seeing her move, acted fast, tackling the woman in the dark robe and pushing her toward the altar. The chamber seemed to tremble beneath their feet, as though the room itself were coming alive, reacting to the conflict within it. But it wasn't enough. The altar, the tablet, the symbols, everything was connected, and Lady Fairfax realized they needed something more than just physical force. They needed the ritual itself to be broken. The power beneath the village had already started to awaken, and with every passing second, it grew stronger. Lucius's cold voice echoed through the chamber as he recovered, standing tall and looming over them. You can't stop it. We've already started the awakening. All we need is the final piece. Lady Fairfax's eyes widened as she looked at the stone tablet again, the pendant's light now growing brighter with every word Lucius spoke. The final piece. She knew what she had to do. Chapter 10. The Final Clue. The air in the chamber felt thick, charged with an energy that made Lady Fairfax's skin prickle. The rumbling beneath their feet grew louder, more insistent, as though the very earth were awakening from a long slumber. The altar glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light, and the pendant, still resting within its groove, seemed to pulse in rhythm with the growing force. Lucius Ward stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and madness. "It's almost over," he said, his voice smooth as if he were savoring the moment. "We have all the pieces. The book, the pendant, and now the final key. The knowledge to release what has been buried for centuries. You should have known, Lady Fairfax. This was always going to happen." Lady Fairfax felt her breath catch in her throat. She could feel the power building around them, pushing against the walls of the chamber, as if it were just waiting for someone to unlock it completely. She glanced at Dr. Branson, his face tight with frustration and fear, and then at the stone altar, where the symbols were now glowing more intensely. "No," Lady Fairfax said firmly, her voice steady, despite the tremor of fear in her chest. "You're wrong. You're playing with something you don't understand. If you release what's down there, it will consume everything. You'll destroy this village and everything in its wake." Lucius laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Consume? My dear, what is life without risk? What is power without sacrifice?" He raised his hands to the air as if to embrace the energy swirling around them. "We've all lived in the shadows for too long. It's time for the world to see the truth. Time to release what's been locked away." Lady Fairfax's eyes flicked to the stone tablet once more, where the final clue lay hidden within the inscriptions. She hadn't seen it at first, too caught up in the escalating chaos of the ritual. But now she could see the final markings, the key to stopping the ritual. The tablet was a map to a place hidden beneath the altar, one that aligned perfectly with the village's history and the power beneath it. It was the source, the heart of the seal, the place that had kept the dangerous force trapped for so long. And it was there, buried beneath the earth. But the map also contained a warning, written in a language that Lady Fairfax had only just begun to understand. The symbols were subtle, hidden in the folds of the inscription, but they were unmistakable once recognized. The power could only be sealed again if the key, the pendant, was placed back into the seal. Not merely unlocking it, but closing it again. The ritual couldn't be completed without this final step. She turned to Dr. Branson, who had also seen the truth in the markings. His eyes widened with understanding. "We need to stop them now. They're almost at the climax of the ritual. If we don't get the pendant back into the seal, it will be too late." Before she could act, the other two members of the society, who had been standing by silently, stepped forward, their eyes narrowing as they assessed the situation. The man, tall and gaunt, stepped in front of Lucius, blocking Lady Fairfax's path. His expression was cold and his hand rested on the dagger at his side. "You're too late," he said with a sneer. "The ritual is almost complete. The power is already shifting. There's nothing you can do now." Lady Fairfax stood her ground, her eyes steady and focused. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "You're unleashing something that will destroy all of us." "I won't let you." Dr. Branson, sensing her resolve, moved swiftly to the altar, his eyes scanning the room for any opportunity to interrupt the ritual. But the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted, becoming heavier, more oppressive, as the seal weakened further. Lucius took a step forward, his voice soft, yet filled with menace. "You think you can stop us, Lady Fairfax? You think you can undo what has been centuries in the making? This power is mine now. We're the ones who will bring about a new world. A world where the old ways are embraced and the old gods are free." Lady Fairfax's breath caught in her chest. Old gods? The ritual wasn't just about power, it was about something far more ancient, something beyond the scope of the village's history. The mention of old gods hidden beneath the earth made everything fall into place. This wasn't just a battle for power, it was a battle to keep something cosmic and ancient sealed away from the world. She turned to Branson urgently. "We need to get the pendant back into the seal. It's the only way to stop them." He nodded grimly, and together they moved toward the altar, but Lucius's voice rang out, stopping them in their tracks. "You're wasting your time," Lucius said, his voice laced with cold finality. "The ritual has already begun, and it can't be undone." "You're too weak. The power is already ours." Lady Fairfax's gaze hardened. She had no more time for talk. They had reached the critical moment. Without the pendant in place, the seal would break completely, and nothing would stop the chaos from being unleashed. With a sudden surge of motion, Lady Fairfax grabbed the pendant and moved toward the stone altar, her steps quick and sure. As she held it up, the glow from the pendant flared brightly, casting long shadows across the chamber. The air hummed as though the very earth beneath them were alive with energy, with anticipation. Lucius's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, you can't." Lady Fairfax didn't hesitate. With one swift motion, she placed the pendant back into the indentation in the altar's surface. The moment it touched the stone, a flash of light erupted from the altar, filling the room with a blinding glow. For a moment, the chamber felt as though it were suspended in time. Nothing moved, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deafening crash, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The walls of the chamber shook, and the sound of grinding stone filled the air. The symbols on the altar glowed brightly, then began to dim as the power that had been released started to retreat. Lucius and his followers staggered back, their eyes wide with shock. The energy that had filled the room began to dissipate, and the oppressive weight that had been building around them lifted, leaving the chamber eerily quiet. Lady Fairfax stood, panting from the effort, as the pendant settled into place. The ritual had been stopped. The seal had been restored. Lucius's face twisted in anger. "You fool! You don't know what you've done." But Lady Fairfax wasn't listening. She turned to Dr. Branson, who was breathing heavily, his face pale but relieved. They had done it. They had stopped the release. But at what cost? What was the ancient power that had been locked away, and for how long could they keep it sealed? As the rumbling in the earth subsided, Lady Fairfax knew the battle was far from over. The village might have been saved, but the secrets buried beneath it would continue to haunt them, and there were still others. Those who would stop at nothing to unlock what had been sealed away. The mystery was far from finished. Chapter 11. The Showdown. The air in the chamber was thick with tension as the last of the glowing light from the altar faded into the stone. Lady Fairfax stood, still gripping the pendant in her hand, her heart racing. The rumbling beneath their feet had stopped, and the ominous energy that had filled the room just moments ago was now gone. The oppressive weight that had threatened to crush them had lifted, but it left behind a chilling sense of uncertainty. Lucius Ward stood across from her, his eyes wild with fury. His dark robes hung loosely around his frame, and for the first time, Lady Fairfax saw the true depth of his desperation. His hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white from the pressure. "You don't understand what you've done, Lady Fairfax," Lucius spat, his voice trembling with rage. "The world was ready for it. The power we were about to unleash was meant to reshape everything, and you stopped it." Lady Fairfax's grip on the pendant tightened. You wanted to release something that should have stayed sealed forever. You were willing to risk everything, to risk this entire village, for power that was never meant for humans. Lucius's eyes narrowed. And who are you to decide what's meant for humanity? The world is full of secrets, secrets that can change the course of history. The old gods are nothing but forgotten truths that people like you are too afraid to face. But we were ready. We were prepared. You were playing with fire, Lady Fairfax said, her voice steady despite the growing storm of emotions swirling in her chest. And you'll burn with it. You're not releasing power, you're inviting destruction. Lucius scoffed, shaking his head slowly, his lips curling into a bitter smile. You think you can stop it now? You think this, he gestured toward the altar, is enough to undo everything? You've only delayed the inevitable. We will return. We will finish what we started. Dr. Branson stepped forward, his face set in a hard line. You won't get the chance, he said firmly. Not while we're standing in your way. Lady Fairfax turned to him, her eyes meeting his with quiet understanding. He was right. The danger wasn't over yet. Lucius and his followers might retreat for now, but they wouldn't stop. They had tasted the power beneath the village, and they would stop at nothing to unleash it again. We need to leave, Doctor, Branson said, his voice low and urgent. They'll be back. We need to get to the village before they can regroup. Lady Fairfax hesitated, her eyes lingering on Lucius. There was no time for further conversation. The power beneath them had been sealed again, but the ritual was only delayed, not erased. If Lucius and his society were allowed to regroup, they would come back with greater force. The pendant was the key, but it was also a beacon drawing those who sought its power. Lucius raised a hand as if to stop them. You can't escape it. This village was built on secrets. The power is bound to this place. You can't hide from it forever. Lady Fairfax took a step back, her mind racing. Then I'll make sure it stays buried. As long as I'm here, I will make sure that you never get the chance to awaken it again. Branson grabbed her arm gently. We can't fight them all, but we can stop them for now. Let's go. Without another word, they turned and hurried toward the exit. Lucius stood there, his expression twisted with rage and frustration. But he made no move to stop them, knowing deep down that there was nothing he could do at this moment. The night air was thick and cold as Lady Fairfax and Doctor Branson emerged from the chamber, the village green stretching before them in the dim light. The sounds of the world outside seemed so distant now, so calm compared to the storm that had just raged beneath the earth. Lady Fairfax's thoughts raced as she and Dr. Branson moved quickly through the darkened streets. The battle was far from over. Lucius and his society wouldn't rest. They had found something that could change the course of history, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. We need to get to the bookshop, Lady Fairfax said, her voice firm. There's no time to waste. Dr. Branson nodded. Agreed. The book, the pendant, they're both part of the same ritual. If we're going to protect this village, we need to understand everything. They reached the bookshop, and Lady Fairfax unlocked the door. Stepping inside quickly, the familiar smell of old paper and leather greeting her. She turned on the lights, the dim glow casting long shadows against the shelves filled with books. But there was no comfort in the quiet now. Lady Fairfax moved to the counter, placing the pendant down carefully. She picked up The Secrets of the Village, the ancient book now more dangerous than ever. We have to find a way to stop them, Lady Fairfax said softly, looking at Dr. Branson. "The ritual's only been delayed, and they won't stop until they have everything." Dr. Branson nodded, his face pale but resolute. "We'll need to gather more information. The book, there's more to it. We've only seen part of the story. We need to find the rest before it's too late." Lady Fairfax felt the weight of the moment. She had stopped Lucius and his followers, for now. But she knew this was only the beginning. The ancient power beneath Saint Hilda's corner was still there, waiting, and there were others who would come, seeking to unleash it once again. As she looked at the pendant, its symbols glowing faintly in the soft light, Lady Fairfax realized the battle was far from over. The village was safe, for now, but the war to keep its secrets buried had just begun. Chapter 12. The Resolution. The days following the confrontation in the underground chamber passed in a blur for Lady Fairfax. The village of St. Hilda's Corner, once again quiet, seemed as though it had never known the horrors that had threatened to break free from beneath its very foundations. But Lady Fairfax knew better. The village might appear serene, but the weight of what had happened still hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Her days were spent sifting through the ancient book, the secrets of the village, poring over every page, every symbol, trying to piece together the rest of the puzzle. But every answer only led to more questions. The ritual that had nearly been completed, the pendant, the symbols, the truth was tangled in layers of history. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized that there was still much hidden beneath the surface. Dr. Branson had been invaluable during this process. Despite his earlier skepticism, he had become more and more certain that they had only touched the edge of something much larger. He was obsessed with finding the final pieces of the ritual, determined to understand everything before the society could try again. But even as they worked, Lady Fairfax couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. It was late one evening, a few days after the confrontation, when the door to her bookshop opened with a soft chime and a familiar face stepped inside. It was Miss Green, the elderly neighbor who had been so helpful during the investigation into Emma's disappearance. She walked slowly, her eyes tired but determined. Lady Fairfax looked up from the book she had been reading, surprised but grateful for the interruption. "Miss Green," she said, offering a warm smile, "what brings you here?" "I'm sorry to bother you, Lady Fairfax," Miss Green said quietly, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "But I think you should know something." Lady Fairfax stood up, her concern immediately piqued. "What is it?" Miss Green hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I've heard some talk around the village. Some of the people who live near the outskirts, they say they've seen things. Strange things. Figures moving in the woods at night. Shadows where there shouldn't be any." She looked down at the floor as if the weight of her own words had suddenly become too much to bear. "They say the earth is shifting. Like something is still trying to break free." Lady Fairfax's stomach twisted. The sensation of unease that had been gnawing at her finally came into focus. Lucius and his followers might have been stopped for now, but the seal had never truly been closed. The power beneath the village was still there, still alive, waiting. "It's not over," Lady Fairfax said softly, her voice steady but filled with a deep, hollow certainty. "Whatever they tried to release, it's still down there, and we may not have stopped it. We've only delayed it." Miss Green nodded slowly, a sad look in her eyes. "I thought so too." That night, as Lady Fairfax sat in the bookshop, the pendant resting in her hand, She felt the weight of the village's history pressing down on her. The ancient power beneath Saint. Hilda's corner had been sealed for centuries, but the knowledge of it, the key to unlocking it, had been passed down through the ages. The society had been trying to release it, to harness it, but they were not the only ones. There were others. Those who had been waiting, watching, and they would not stop until they had what they sought. Lady Fairfax knew the truth now. The seal could not be broken completely without consequence. To keep the power locked away, someone had to be willing to sacrifice everything. It was not just a matter of protecting the village, it was a matter of protecting the world itself from the darkness that lay beneath it. Dr. Branson entered the bookshop, his face grim but determined. "We've gathered everything," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of their task. "We know what we need to do next. We can destroy the pendant, we can destroy the book, we can erase all traces of it, and that will keep the society from ever trying again." Lady Fairfax looked up at him, her mind racing. "And the power beneath the village? What about that?" Branson hesitated, his eyes flicking to the pendant in her hand. "We can't destroy it. It's part of the ritual. But we can lock it away again, keep it sealed. Keep it hidden." Lady Fairfax sighed, running her fingers over the surface of the pendant, feeling its cold metal. She had learned enough to know that no matter what they did, the power would always be there. There was no simple solution to what had been set in motion. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "What if someone else comes along? What if they try again?" Branson stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "Together we'll stop them. We can't erase the past, but we can control the future." Lady Fairfax nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had come so far, and yet the journey was far from over. The power beneath Saint. Hilda's corner might remain sealed for now, but as long as people sought to control it, as long as the knowledge existed, the risk would never truly be gone. As Lady Fairfax and Dr. Branson set to work, preparing to destroy the book and the pendant, final steps to closing the chapter on the ritual, the village remained eerily quiet. But Lady Fairfax knew it was only a matter of time before the world would be forced to reckon with the power they had tried to awaken. For now, St. Hilda's corner was safe, but the ancient force that had been buried beneath it would continue to wait, as it always had, for the right moment to break free. And when that moment came, Lady Fairfax would be ready. The end.